Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today to attend the English webinar for recommendation letters for high school students. My name is Chizuru Sasada. I'm EducationUSA advisor in Tokyo. I'll be the MC for today. First, I'd like to quickly introduce about the EducationUSA Advising Center. EducationUSA Advising Center is a U.S. Department of State network of advising center in more than 170 countries around the world. We promote U.S. higher education by providing accurate, comprehensive, and current information advice about studying at U.S. colleges and universities. In Japan, we have 6 EducationUSA centers: Sapporo, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Fukuoka, and Okinawa. So if you have any questions, please get in touch with the EducationUSA centers nearby. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about our upcoming event in September. On Friday, September 23rd, EducationUSA will hold a college fair in a hybrid style. In the morning, we will have the online fair, and in the afternoon, we have an in-person fair after 3 years. And also, we will provide a special webinar, special sessions, inviting scholarship organizations and English language test organizations. So I hope you will tell your students about this webinar, this college fair, and please ask them to join. Thank you. Okay, now this is today's agenda. Now I'd like to introduce 2 wonderful speakers from the United States, Miss Brenna May from Bennington College, Vermont, and Miss Alyssa Scarf, Transylvania University in Kentucky. As you see the agenda, we have time for Q&A after their presentation, so please send us many questions. So now I'd like to hand it over to you, Brenna and Alice. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am now going to share my screen. And we will get started. So just briefly, again, we appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. Thank you so much. My name is Alice, and I am the Assistant Director for International Recruitment at Transylvania University, which is located in Lexington, Kentucky in the US.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brenna May. I'm the Associate Director of International Admissions at Bennington College, which is in Bennington, Vermont, also in the US, and we're in the more northeastern part of the country. And as Alice said, just to echo one more time, we're really excited to chat with all of you today. And I'm going to kick it off. We're going to be talking about recommendation letters primarily today, but then also a bit about school profiles as well. And not only what these things are, but how they play into a student's chances for admission in the US. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, I think. So one of the things we wanted to touch on briefly at the beginning is what exactly US universities are looking for in student applicants. So I won't read this whole list, it's there in front of you for you to see, but these are some of the things that US universities might be looking for in an entire application from a student. So these are things coming from their essay, their list of extracurricular involvements, certainly their transcript and their other academic information, but then also the letters of recommendation as well. In the US, which is much different than in other countries, we want to get to know the student as a whole, certainly including academic achievements, but also including many other things as well. So you'll see things that listed on here that might be a bit different from how other universities do it. So we're looking for things like special talents, compelling life stories, how the student is a good fit for our university. Although Bennington and Transylvania share some characteristics, we're looking for different students who can contribute to our college campuses. And that's also very different from, say, a large university with 50,000 students on campus. very different from Bennington with under 1,000. So these are all things that we might be looking for in an application. Now, the letters of recommendation can and should focus on certain areas, and these are some of the things on the list, but maybe not necessarily all of them. You'll see we've highlighted a few things here. These are things that we feel as teachers and counselors that you can address better than maybe the student can talk about it themselves, or that you'll have a unique insight into. So the things that we would really want to see from a letter of recommendation would include talking about a student's academic performance and how they've done consistently throughout their secondary school, the rigor of their classes. So are these classes difficult that they're taking? Are they maximizing the curriculum that they have access to at their high school? Outside of academics, we're also looking for things like their character. Who is this student? Who do you think they are? Who are they in the classroom? And then also, how are they involved in the community? Certainly Bennington and Transylvania, as smaller colleges, community is very important to us in particular, but certainly to any US university. We want to know, what has the student done in secondary school that they might then be able to translate into their college experience as well? You'll see we've also highlighted things like special talent or compelling life story. So if you know something about a student that is just really interesting, really different, something that will make the student stand out, we really encourage you to include those types of things as well. The other thing to highlight here is the things that we did not highlight on this list as what need to be included in letters of recommendation. Standardized testing is a big one. Although this may be part of the admission process for some universities, we have those scores already. So you don't need to take the time in your letter to write about that, because we already know that information. And then the things at the bottom as well, these are more things that we are looking for as admission officers to determine, rather than something that you need to speak on in your letter. Certainly overall fit of the student for the university, you're going to be writing a general letter, not a letter to Bennington, not a letter to any university. So we don't want to get that specific. We want to get a more general view of who this student is, and again, what they will bring to our community. So the next piece to talk about is, why do we require letters of recommendation? We've talked about what we're looking for, some of the things that you don't need to refer to, but what exactly do we get from these letters? And holistic admissions is really a buzzword in the US higher education areas in our country. But what it means, again, going back to what I said before, is that we don't only care about academics. We do care about academics. We want to make sure students are going to be academically successful, but we care about all of the other things that we mentioned as well. So the letters of recommendation allow us to know things about the student that we would not otherwise have known. A great example of this is how the student is in the classroom. We can see their grades, but you as teachers can talk about, how well do they participate? Are they creative in the things that they're thinking? Do they work well with groups, or are they better as an individual? All of those kinds of things we would never know other than the teacher telling us in a letter. Some universities do not require letters of recommendation, so that's something to be aware of as well. And one of the biggest reasons is that generally letters of recommendation tend to be pretty positive. A student isn't asking a teacher to write a letter if they think that it will be negative. So some universities have recognized that and said that they will no longer require these letters because they feel that they're always positive. I know our two universities do still see the value in these letters, but that's just something to be aware of that you might see out there at other institutions.
So we, in covering sort of what should be in the letter, we also want to talk about who should and shouldn't write the letters of recommendation, because that will come up too when you're talking to students about, that their need to request a letter of recommendation or two or even more sometimes. They're going to ask, well, who should I approach to write this letter? And so usually it's going to be a teacher in an academic subject. And this is usually one of, what we call sort of a core subject. So literature, math, science, social science, language. If you're doing IB, then TOK is also good as well. Sometimes if the student is applying to a drama or a music program, then having the drama or music teacher write is also okay. But in a lot of cases, the universities really do want to hear from a teacher that's in an English class instead of a PE class, or a math class instead of like a wood shop class. I don't even know if that's still a thing anymore. It was when I was a student. So we really do want to hear from teachers that have had these students recently. We want to hear about what these students are like as students right before they get to our campus. So ideally, it would be a teacher in the last 2-ish years before they get to university. So in the last couple of years of high school, it could even be the last 3 years of high school, but ideally about 2 years of high school. And if it's going to be, if the student is applying to a tech university, then it really does have to be very subject specific. If they're not applying to a tech university, if they're not applying directly into a program like physics or aerospace technology or something that's a very specific program, most universities in the US, you are applying to the university as a whole. You're not applying to a program specifically. So in that case, even if a student is interested in studying business, they can get a letter of recommendation from an English teacher because the person reading it is an admissions counselor. So it's all good. We just want to hear some general insights from a teacher about what the student is like in an academic setting. So on the flip side, who should not write a letter of recommendation would be a relative. I get a lot of those. A teacher who doesn't want to. And this is where we will talk in a minute about how you can help students request these letters. Because sometimes teachers are too busy. Sometimes they just don't want to or can't. So those teachers, if the student tries to force them to write the letter, might not write the best letter. So that teacher should not write a letter. If the student is using an independent counselor or an independent educational advisor, they're sometimes called, or an independent educational counselor, that person can't write the letter either. They don't know the student in an academic setting. Another person that's really not ideal to write the letter is the principal or headmaster of a school. A lot of times, especially if the student is applying to a highly selective university, they think that they need to go higher to get these letters of recommendation, that it's going to mean more. But unless that principal or headmaster has really gotten to know the student personally and has seen them in either classroom settings or as a leader in the school, then it really isn't going to make that much difference. We really do need to hear from the teachers, the people who have seen the students in the classroom setting, because we want to see what they're going to be like in our classrooms as well. Again, a person who should not write a letter for a student is a coach. A lot of times athletes spend almost more time with their coaches than they do with their teachers or their parents or their families. But even so, the coach is still not going to be able to write a letter of reference for an academic purpose unless that coach is also a teacher. So as you're going to find, or maybe you've already figured this out with US admissions, there are always caveats. There's always an exception to every rule that we're going to tell you. So usually coaches shouldn't write the letter, but sometimes they can if they're also a teacher. If the student really likes a teacher, had a great relationship with them, and really wants this teacher to write them a letter, but they only had this teacher in year 7 or 8, a long time ago, then that teacher is also not ideal to write the letter. So again, I covered a few of these. Outside of that academic specific setting, there are some times that somebody else can write a letter of recommendation. And every single university in the US, again, back to this it depends for every university. Every university can make their own rules for how they want to go about requiring their letters of recommendation. So as Brenna said, some universities don't require one at all. Some will just require one, and it must be from an academic core subject teacher. So that literature, language, science, social science class. Other universities might say they want one letter from a teacher, one letter from a counselor. Others might say they want one letter from a teacher, one letter from a counselor, and one letter from anyone that the student wants to bring in. And so in that case, it could be one of these options, because obviously your students have busy lives and they are not sitting in a classroom all the time. So it sometimes does help us with our holistic applications to hear from people that are engaged with these students outside of the academic setting. So in those cases, these are just some examples of other people that can write a letter of recommendation, but again, only if the university allows it. So just make sure that the student has checked the website and has double checked that the university will allow that. When you're talking to your students about how to ask their teachers, the students should definitely ask early. They need to ask in person, and they need to ask as an actual question. I spent about 20 years as a high school teacher and as a high school counselor. And I made sure that my students knew that they had to ask a teacher as a question, you know, will you please write a letter? Will you please consider writing a letter of recommendation for me? Instead of, I need you to write a letter of recommendation for me. And that will make a difference in how the in how the teacher responds. Maybe sometimes take a little gift. Chocolate was one of my favorites. So just something like that. Teachers are very busy, as you all know. So, you know, it takes time to write these letters for US universities. So we want to make sure that the students understand that they need to give their teachers this kind of time. In the Common Application, especially for US universities, there is a spot where students have to sign a disclaimer that says that they will not look at the teacher's letter of recommendation. And this is very, very specific to the US. I know when I've worked with students applying elsewhere in the world, that students were able to look at the letters of recommendation for other university systems, other places in the world. But on the Common Application, we do encourage students to sign. It says, I waive my right to see the letter of recommendation. It just means that it's telling us that the student is confident that the teacher will write a good letter and that they don't need to see it. And if a teacher says no, the student just needs to say, thank you very much. I appreciate you considering that, and then move on to a different teacher. Again, as you talk to your students about how to go about this process, just knowing when to just kind of ask and then step back and ask somebody else. You know, students have a lot of teachers, and I'm sure they have a lot of choices in who to write these letters for them. And then one thing that Brenna and I were talking about as we put this together, we would encourage students to not give teachers a CV or a resume, a list of their activities, because if a teacher needs that, then that's not what we want in the letter. We want the teacher to write about what they know about the student already. We don't want them to add in things that they don't already know about the student. So maybe they need a little reminder, hey, what was that activity that I helped you with a year ago when you were volunteering at school? But other than that, we don't need the teacher in their letter to recap everything that the student has done in their activities, because we already have that. So we want to hear from you as a teacher about your perspectives on this student. How do you see the student? How do you see the student interacting with their peers and with other faculty members?
So hopefully some of the tips we've shared already have been helpful, but we also thought it would be helpful to give a few specific tips of things based on our experiences that have been helpful in the past. So one of the things is, if at all possible, it's really nice to have a recommendation letter on school letterhead, because that just gives a really official sense to the letter, that we know who it's coming from. And that also goes with the second point of please sign your letters, and not just with your name, but also with what you teach, maybe your title, just because, again, that gives us a really solid core of who you are and how you know the student. It does happen where I get letters that aren't signed, and then I'm kind of thinking, oh, this is a great letter, but I'm not 100% sure who wrote it. So that's always a little interesting. If at all possible, we as admission officers would very much appreciate it if every single letter could be only one page. We know that sometimes this is not possible. Maybe you have so many nice things to say about the student, and that is wonderful. But if it is possible to be one page, or maybe just slightly longer, we read a lot of letters, a lot of essays throughout the admission season, and it's really helpful for us to get more of a distilled version of what you might want to say, or what someone else might want to say about the student. It's also helpful to think about formatting, margins, print size. You can do all of that to have it fit on one page. That's perfectly fine, especially if you find that your letter is going into 3 or 4 or more pages. I would really encourage you to try to cut it down, because unfortunately at that point we're probably going to be skimming, and I don't want to skim your wonderful letter, but it is in the interest of time. One big thing, of course, is that please don't make any letter specific for one university. And this is often because the letters are being submitted through the Common Application, which goes to, I think it's over 800 colleges in the US right now that are members. So a student could be sending their application to 20 or 25 of those colleges, and you don't want your letter to say, this student is a great fit for Bennington, and then have 24 other universities also read that. So you don't need to have that information. That's not something we're looking for. So you can absolutely just leave that out. And then just a quick general outline. Of course, you can do something different. You can be creative. You can use bullet points. We're open to whatever you would like to do. But if you're really struggling to figure out how to start, this might help. An introductory paragraph about essentially who you are. How have you known the student? What is that context? That's very helpful for us to know. The body paragraphs in the middle can be the anecdotes about the student's qualities, and then concluding with a summation and the final endorsement. Often people will say, I highly recommend this student for admission, or something like that. And that's just kind of nice for us to see. So a few other insights from our side of things that we've seen that either work well or don't work as well. In terms of things that we love to see, especially, this is the number one for me, specific examples or stories. I love to read stories about students, anecdotes about who they are, especially if it's something that I wouldn't know otherwise. If this is something the student wouldn't share with me, or didn't think was relevant to their application, but then a teacher writes about it and it's just really charming, and it's a lovely anecdote and a story. I love reading those. So definitely think about that. We appreciate any kind of context around grades. So if you're working with a student, for example, who struggled in your classroom and maybe didn't get straight A's, but there's some reasons behind why they struggled, it's very helpful for us to know that as well. If we don't have that information, we just have to go with what's on the page. We have to say, okay, these are the grades the student has. But if we know that the student had some issues at home that year, or they were very ill, or maybe the way your school handled virtual learning was very difficult, or something like that, any of those things, please feel free to include that. And we appreciate your candor as well. It's one of my, I would say, pet peeves about letters of recommendation is when there is a low grade on a student's transcript and no one ever talks about it, because then I don't know what happened there, and I have to make my own conclusions, which are probably wrong, but there's nothing else there's no other information I can go on. So being really transparent and having candor with us is really helpful and appreciated. Institution-specific info about your school is occasionally helpful if there are things things about your school that are perhaps very different from how things are normally run, or again, going back to the COVID example, if there were some examples of things during the COVID pandemic that you feel need to be shared, please feel free to do that. And then finally, again, going back to the idea of context and additional information, we encourage appropriate insights into the student's background. And we say appropriate because we don't need to know every detail. If a student has a tough home life that you are privy to, we don't need to know all of those details. But if you can give us kind of the broad strokes of, this student has struggled in the classroom because there's some trouble at home, that's what we would need to know. And I would also say only share that if you have personal information about it. If the student has confided in you and the student feels comfortable with you sharing it, just make sure that that's in the front of your mind. A few things that we don't need to see in a letter of recommendation: any information that is already included in the application or the student's list of activities, because that's in the application. So we don't need to see that. It is extremely, extremely common for us to read letters that are essentially just a list of the activities that students have done in the high school. And as Alice said, unless you've directly supervised a student in an activity, we don't need to see that because we'll read about it other places. Any information that's in the application already, we have that information. We want new information from these letters. Of course, a dislike is anytime we see incorrect information in a letter. This absolutely happens. We understand that teachers and counselors have many, many letters to write, and it's usually just an honest mistake, but trying to make sure that certainly the student's name is correct, but also pronouns, if you're familiar with what the student prefers to be referred to as, that's something that is important to us as well, because then we know how to refer to them. And then finally, this goes along with the previous point, we don't want to see copy and pasted phrases from different students' letters. This is also common. And again, we understand that there are a lot of letter requests out there, that you're all very busy, but especially if we read two students back to back and they have almost identical letters, that's pretty easy for us to spot. So just try to avoid that if you can. Try to make them as personal as possible. And then Alice kind of alluded to this before, but if you're a teacher, you should be primarily focused on the academic experience that you've had with this student, not so much on the extracurricular involvement, unless you are directly involved with the students in that role. So hopefully some of our insights into letters of recommendation were helpful. We really hope that they were. I know we had a couple of questions. We'll get to those in a few minutes. But one thing we did also want to share is just a couple of thoughts about school profiles. And school profiles are honestly one of my favorite things to receive. They can be very, very helpful. I know they are less common with international schools. So if any of you are considering developing one, please do, because we would appreciate it. But the school profile is a great opportunity for you to give the insight into the unique character of your school for every student who's applying from your school. It can include, and we'll have a better list on the next page, but things like facts and figures about your school, your curriculum, your grading scale, anything that is relevant. We have a couple of resources here. I know we can share this presentation afterwards, but the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, or NACAC, has a lot of examples and also best practices of how to develop these. So there's some good resources out there to look into. But we can also look on the next slide. Oh, Alex, go ahead.
Just saying, the examples of school profiles from NACAC, hundreds of schools have uploaded their school profiles, hundreds, just for free. Like, you can just look at hundreds and hundreds of school profiles just to see what they've done. No two are alike. There is no formula. It's just it's just a collection of information about your school, however you want to do it. So looking at all of these different types of profiles is just a really good insight, because there really is no specific way that you have to do something.
Absolutely. And you'll see examples that are really fancy, that were clearly done by a marketing team, that do a really good job. And those are great, but all we need is really just a document of some of this information. It doesn't need to be fancy. some of the things that we might be looking for are here on this list. I would advise you to assume that the reader has never heard of your school before, because that will help you with the baseline of information that we might need. Things like what curriculum you're using, what your grading scale is. Grading scale is one of the biggest things that I look for, so that's really, really helpful. Any kind of policies or abbreviations we might see on the transcript, the language of instruction, if it is not obvious from the transcript, it's really helpful to say what that is. I've even read schools before where half of the classes are in English and half of the classes are not in English, so explaining what that looks like. Contact information for counselors, if you are comfortable sharing that, that can be helpful as well. One of the big things you'll see, I think especially at US high schools, is you'll see a big long list of where previous graduates of the high school have been admitted and also where they attended university. That can be helpful for us. It can give us some insight into where are these students looking? Are they focusing on a certain state or area? Are they willing to travel a bit further? So that is also something to consider. Of course, that's a lot of data to manage. It's a lot of space to take up in your profile. So keep that in mind, but that is something we see pretty frequently. And then just a couple of other things at the bottom, you might consider talking about the location, if the location has a particular impact on your school, if there's any sort of required activities. One thing this is for a domestic US school, but one of the things I remember from this particular school is that in their curriculum section, they talk about the fact that AP English and AP History is required of every single student who attends that school. So that gives me great insight into, okay, so if the student has only taken those 2 AP classes, they were required to take those, they didn't have a choice. So that is really, really important for us to know. We do recommend that profiles are updated every year, especially if the information changes. And we also appreciate if they're relatively easy to find on your school website, because that can help us if we're frantically Googling, trying to find out something about your school. It'll probably come up pretty easily, which is always appreciated. So I think that is it in terms of our presentation on letters of recommendation and school profile. Alice and I are each just going to take a couple of minutes to give you a really brief overview of our institutions. Hopefully you're intrigued by where we work at this point. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I work at Bennington College, which is located in Bennington, Vermont. You can see this beautiful aerial shot on your screen right now. Vermont is an incredibly beautiful state. The map is a little bit small, but you can kind of see that we are near New York, we are near Massachusetts. Some other schools near us that you may have heard of include Middlebury, Williams, Amherst, Skidmore. Those are all relatively close by. But Bennington is a pretty unique place. We are a small liberal arts college. We have less than 1,000 students, about 750 undergraduate students on campus. So definitely on the, I would say, one of the smallest ends of the liberal arts scale that you might see. We have about 97% of our students living on campus, and the community is really important to us. 18% of our students are international students, so we have a pretty large international student population from over 60 different countries. But what makes Bennington really unique, even among other liberal arts colleges, is that we have a very unique academic approach to what our students are doing. So rather than asking students to choose a major, as you'll see at many other places, Bennington asks our students to build their own academic plan from the ground up. So we do not require students to take any set of classes. There are no required classes at Bennington. You are never asked to choose a specific major, but we have a list of over 45 areas of study on our campus that students can use to build their ideal academic scenario. There's a lot of flexibility, and there's a reason that on the screen right now I have listed that it's self-directed learning with graduate style advising. So at Bennington, it is all up to the student what they are learning. We are not telling them what to take, they're telling us what they're interested in. And the graduate style advising comes in that this is kind of what it looks like in graduate school. You're telling your teachers what the subjects are that you would like to study rather than the other way around. So at Bennington, students are asked to take that full ownership over what they're learning, and they can get very creative. Some students study one thing, many students study 5 or 10 things on campus, and they combine them in interesting ways too. The only other thing I would like to highlight is that in addition to these flexible academics, we also have a required internship period every year of college. So students will graduate with 4 internships, at least 4 internships on their resume before they leave Bennington. So this is a great way to take that really flexible academic experience and apply it to the real world to see what kind of career do I really want to do? Can I, is it what I've always wanted to do, or is it something completely different? And how can I let this impact my academics as well? So it's a unique place. It's probably a little different than any other place you've heard of, but we're really looking for students who are creative and curious and want to be part of this really intentional community in the beautiful state of Vermont. So I'll turn it over to you, Alice.
That's great. I love that picture too. Yeah, I think we're all in love with our drone shots for our campuses. So here's an overhead shot of our campus. So again, I'm from Transylvania University, and we are located right in the middle of Lexington, Kentucky. And Lexington is a mid-sized city that's at the heart of the state of Kentucky, and the state of Kentucky is in the middle of the eastern third of the US. So we're actually the 16th oldest university in the US. We are the oldest university west of, there's a chain of mountains that goes down the East Coast. We are the oldest university west of that. And so we've been doing this a long time, and I've figured out some things along the way. We're small. We only have about 1,000 students. We are undergraduate only. So that means that we don't have teaching assistants. We are all, professors, full professors teach all of our classes. All of our classes are very small. It's, small classrooms, and the desks are all in a circle so that there's no back row. Everybody can see everybody. I always tell my international students, you're not going to be able to clump up with other international students. You're not going to be able to hide in the back row. You're going to be seen and known because everybody's curious and friendly and wants to get to know people. Lexington as a city, and certainly Transylvania as a community, is a place where when you pass people on the street, you meet their eyes and you say, hello, how are you? And you expect an answer. And so it's hard you can't not look at somebody when you pass them on the street. And one sort of quirk of our campus is that everybody holds doors for each other. So when students go through a door, you'll see that they turn around and check to make sure that there's nobody behind them before they let the door go as they go through the door. And students, faculty, staff all do this. And it's just sort of an endearing trait of our campus. And so we have excellent placement in graduate programs. We are aware that because we're undergraduate only, we want to make sure that our students move on past us to success in the world, if that's a job or graduate school. So we have excellent placement in medical schools and in law schools, but in any graduate program that a student might be interested in. Because we are so well positioned in our city, we're only 2 blocks from downtown. Students can do internships and shadowships and have mentors and just take advantage of our wonderful setting. We're only 10 minutes from our airport with direct access to all the major cities on the East Coast. So it makes it really easy for our students to either get home if they're international students or go for study abroads, which is another favorite thing for any students to do. Yeah, I think that's kind of it for Transylvania. We do like to make sure that people know that we are mostly a residential campus. So again, even though that we're small, most of the students do live on campus. The students who do live off campus tend to live right around campus. They're very proud of themselves for having apartments and being adults, but then they are living like, 1 house away from campus. So it's, they don't want to stray too far because there's too much going on. So yeah, that's Transylvania. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can take a look at the chat and at the Q&As, and we will answer questions. I think we still have some good time to do that.
Yes. Thank you very much, Alice and Brenna, for your great presentation. So can you take care of the Q&A? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Definitely. We have a couple of kind of quicker questions that I'll just do really quickly, and then we can go to the ones that might require a little bit more explanation. So one of the questions is when I was talking about signing the letter, do we mean that it's better to write a signature in handwriting? Not necessarily. You can absolutely just type your name and your subject area and that kind of biographical information. Absolutely not necessary to sign it in your handwriting. Of course you can if you would really like to, but it's not necessary. And then the other really quick question is, what is TOK? We mentioned TOK and someone wasn't sure what it was. It is a subject in the International Baccalaureate degree. It stands for Theory of Knowledge. So that was just an example of a subject that a teacher from that subject in that curriculum would be a good one to write a letter.
Yeah, so then I'm going to go back, I'm going to go up to the top and sort of work our way down. One question says that you said admissions officers read recommendation letters. Other than those people, for example, do professors read recommendation letters in your institutions? If so, how do admissions officers and professors or others read the letters differently? Could you kindly explain? At Transylvania, it is just admissions that reads the letters. And I think that's true for the vast majority of liberal arts universities in the US, that since students are not applying to a program specifically, they are not applying to a major, they are applying to the university as a whole. We ask them what their majors, what they might be interested in studying, or what their academic interests are, but they're not applying to that specific area, certainly not at Bennington with their different approach anyway. But, so the professors are not involved in the admission process. Brenna, do you guys do it any sort of different way?
No, we're the same. So at Bennington, and I think Alice is right that it's the most of the small liberal arts colleges. It's just the admission officers who are reading it. In my experience, I think more commonly where you would see professors involved would maybe be at the graduate level. So if someone is applying to a master's degree in a particular subject, that is likely going to go through the faculty rather than the admission office in some cases. But again, for us, we are reading them ourselves. And I think Alice is right that there are some in undergraduate programs that might do it a little bit differently, but mostly there is kind of a centralized admission office that will at least do a preliminary review of all of the admission materials.
And then the next question says it would be very helpful if you could explain more specifically about the common application section on evaluating applicants. So the common application is a whole nother webinar topic. So it is a giant form. There are so many parts. As a recommender, you would be sent a form that you can fill out in addition to writing a letter. You don't have to fill out the form if you don't want to, but it sort of makes things a little bit easier to fill out. So that's just one way that the common application does it. Other universities will use different applications and they'll do it differently. You can ignore that form altogether on the common application and you can just send a letter to the university in some cases. So the common application, you can look it up. I'll put the address in the chat. It's called commonapp.org. Where'd my chat go? And I lost my chat. I will try to figure out where the chat went. There it is. Okay. And you can actually, so Common App has made it so that you as a counselor or a teacher can make sort of a pretend application and just sort of play around in there to see what it is. So if you have students that are using the Common Application, you can get in there and play with it. And other than that, you can pretend like it doesn't exist because you have lots of other things to do. If you don't have to worry about it, worry about it. Can you tell us some examples of good recommendation letters? Just, I think following we had that little just guideline of intro paragraph, body paragraph, and conclusion paragraph. We don't need it to be a lot, like Brenna was saying. there's no real perfect way to do this. What we want to hear from you is what you know about this student. So telling us about one time when the student's project blew up and how she reacted after that, you know, and maybe she was like, okay, we're gonna just do this again and we'll clean it up and figure it out next time because I think I know what I did wrong, and really excited that now she's got the answer, you know, so let's do this again. Or it would have been like me in chemistry class and would have been like, nope, I'm never gonna do this again. So, you know, tell us what you know about the student and tell us those stories. So a little bit of intro about yourself and the school, stories about the students that you can tell us honestly and earnestly, and then, you know, your conclusion about if you think the student will do well at university.
Yeah, I think actual examples, as was asked in another question, can you share some of the letters that we thought were really well written? I think that's tricky just because of privacy concerns. It's difficult for us to share those things. I did want to, in the chat though, share an article that I knew I had seen, so I quickly Googled it, which was on our NACAC. Again, that's the National Association of College Admissions Counseling in the US. And it was entitled Recs That Change Lives. And this was a survey that was sent out not only to college admission officers, but also to college counselors in the high school level as well, of what are admissions officers looking for, what do counselors write about, what do teachers write about. And I just thought that it was really interesting. And there were a couple of other kind of outlines shared there as well. So I thought that would be a good resource.
That's great. Yeah, we should put that in the presentation for next time too. Do you offer scholarships for international students in your institutions? Absolutely. Brenna, yes.
Yes, yeah, we definitely do. Definitely should have said this earlier and totally slipped my mind. But yes, Bennington has both merit or academic-based scholarships and also need-based financial aid. So our students can do very well in terms of financial aid. Some students will even receive a full scholarship, although those are very competitive, of course, but you know, they are available.
Great. Yeah, we have scholarships that go all the way up to full tuition, but we do not have the need-based aid. If the college website just says recommendation letter rather than academic recommendation letter, would it be okay to assume the letters can come from a teacher who supervises club activity rather than subject? It depends.
I was going to say it's a strong maybe.
Yeah, it depends on the university, because usually when a university says recommendation letter, the assumption is it's an academic recommendation. They just didn't say the word academic. The universities that say academic recommendation from a core academic subject teacher, those are the universities that are only want to hear from English, science, social studies, and are very specific about it and don't want to hear from anybody else. But I think it's safest to assume that any recommendation letter, unless it specifically says that it can come from anybody, they're looking from a teacher.
Yeah, I think that is. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's safest to assume that it should be from an academic teacher. I know there is some wiggle room at some institutions about this. You know, for example, I was just looking up on my own website what it says because I didn't know what language we had used. And we do say teacher recommendations from teachers of at least 2 different subject areas. Choose from English, mathematics, foreign languages, science, and social studies. You may submit additional recommendations from other teachers, mentors, and employers. However, I also know internally that we have gladly accepted letters from art teachers or music teachers because Bennington is a place where students can study that. So this is another good example of it's really important to ask the institutions, because sometimes, you know, as much as we try to keep our websites updated, sometimes something like this kind of falls through or isn't clear enough. So if this is a particular example of a student who sees this on a website and isn't sure what it means, I would just try to reach out to the admission office because I'm sure that they can provide some clarity.
Every admission office has a Brenna or an Alice that can help you with these questions or help your student. When a recommendation letter is written in Japanese and translated into English, do you need a certification of translation along with the original one? we talked about this before we started the seminar. We don't need I don't need a certification of a translation. I'm happy to get any kind of translation, but not from the student. The student should not be the one translating the letter. But you know, sometimes certifications make it more expensive or more difficult to get a translation. So Brenna, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think we're also a little bit more flexible with these kinds of things. You know, I have definitely seen letters come through where I have the English version and I have the original language version. You know, for me, I can't read that language, so I don't really look at it, but I guess it is somewhat of a safeguard for some institutions if there's any concerns about the legitimacy of the translation or something like that. I don't think I've ever actually seen a certification of translation, more that it would just be, here's the English and here's the original Japanese in this case. But again, this is an it depends question. There are some universities, I would say especially larger ones, that are much stricter about this, that they really need evaluation, they need translation services by a third party. So again, unfortunately, it's going to be, you probably need to check with the institution.
And the universities that are very specific about how they want that will probably have that on their website.
Yeah,
I hope.
Yeah.
But you have to check with them. Some universities use evaluation services. In that case, do we need to write school reports, or the evaluation service company does it for us? So school reports that are part of the common application are separate from the evaluation services. So universities tend to use the evaluation services to help universities compare, to sort of make an international high school diploma to help universities figure out how an international high school diploma might be the equivalent of a US high school diploma. So that's the sort of use for an evaluation service in general. So a school report is you telling us a little bit about your school in lieu of school profile. So if you have a school profile, that gives us a lot more information. The school report on the common application gives us a little bit of information, just sort of like drop down, it's little drop down questions. There are sort of three different pieces of information. But again, for the smaller universities like us, yeah, you just happen to get two of the smallest universities in the whole US for your presenters. And so for us, all of these details are really important because you know, we know all these students and they're taking up space on our campus, and we really want to be able to picture the three-dimensional human being as we read all of this information. We want to know where they're coming from. So school reports are important, the school profile is important, and in some cases the evaluation service is important, but not always.
And the only other thing I will add, because I agree with everything that Alice said, is that most of the time a school report or school profile is not required for the student. It is very helpful for us to receive that with a transcript, but what is required for admission for the student is the transcript itself. So just wanted to put that out there as well. If anyone is thinking, oh my God, I have to develop a school profile and it's almost September already, you know, of course that's helpful for us. And if you have the time, I encourage it, but it's not going to negatively affect your students if they don't have a school profile. So just wanted to say that.
You know, a school profile would be a good project for like a journalism club, or a student project for student government or something like that, because it is sort of like a brag sheet for the school. So instead of teachers having to do it, maybe you all could ask your students to do it. one less thing for you to do.
Well, thank you so much, Brenna and Alice, for your excellent presentation, also for answering so many questions. And we really learned so much from you people, and also from your perspective as admissions officers. It was really, really, really great. Thank you so much. So if you have anything to say to Japanese high school teachers. Can you just tell us anything?
Oh, that's it. Well, thank you again. Thank you for having us and for asking such great questions. We really do appreciate that engagement. And I would just say, a final note on letters of recommendation is that yes, they're important, and we want to learn about the student. And they are a great window into who the student is. But I also want to take a little bit of the pressure off, because I think there is, especially from students, they think, oh, if I get a great rec letter, then I'm guaranteed to be admitted to these really selective places. And that's not the case. It helps us build a better idea of who the student is. It is a very important aspect of the application, but it is not going to be the reason that a student is admitted or the reason that a student is not admitted. So I always like to just have a little caveat at the end.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very true. I think the students tend to get overwrought about it. But I would just say that we appreciate so much what all of you do for your students. I don't think your students know how hard you work, and all the things that you do for them. And I know they take you for granted. I know they do. But we appreciate everything that you do. We love reading your letters. And thank you so much for supporting your students through high school and helping them get to their next step. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much again, Alice and Brenna, for your presentation and for your time. Right now it's almost midnight in your time zone. So thank you so much for staying up so late. So I hope to see you again. I hope to work with you again. Actually, Bennington is participating in the college fair, right? Are you coming, Brenna?
I'm not. No, I
Okay.
think we wanted to participate, but I wasn't able to make it work, which was very sad for me.
Oh, okay. So I hope we can see you again to work together again. So thank you so much. Thank you. So
Absolutely.
this is the we stop the recording now. Hold on.